Daniel had always thought of his apartment as an ordinary place. Nothing about it stood out, just a small, cozy space with beige walls and a few mismatched pieces of furniture. It was the kind of place someone would come to after a long day at work, relax, and forget about the world outside. But today, something was different. As Daniel unlocked the door to his apartment, he felt a strange chill in the air. He brushed it off as a draft, but the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He stepped inside, tossing his keys onto the kitchen counter and heading to the living room to check the mail. That's when he saw her, a woman, lying on his couch. She was still and appeared unconscious, but the way she looked, so out of place, so unlike anyone Daniel had ever seen, made him freeze in his tracks. Her skin had a strange glow to it, almost as if it wasn't quite human. She wore a dark, tight-fitting suit that seemed to shimmer in the dim light of the apartment, and her long black hair cascaded over the pillow like a wave. Her features were delicate but sharp, with high cheekbones and piercing eyes. But what struck Daniel the most was the odd, almost unnatural aura surrounding her. He blinked twice, sure that his eyes were playing tricks on him. Maybe he was tired. Maybe the stress from work had finally caught up with him. But no, she was real. The pulse of unease in his chest told him that this was no ordinary visitor. "Hello." Daniel's voice cracked as he spoke, unsure whether he should approach or back away. "Hey, are you okay?" There was no answer. The woman didn't stir. Her chest rose and fell with a calm, rhythmic breath, but there was no sign of consciousness. Daniel's heart raced. He didn't know who she was, how she had gotten there, or what to do. But one thing was clear, she wasn't supposed to be here. As he cautiously moved closer, he noticed something even stranger. The air around her felt different. A soft hum filled the room, just barely noticeable. It was like the walls themselves were vibrating, and the light in the room flickered slightly, as if reacting to her presence. "All right, this is insane," Daniel muttered to himself. "I've got to be dreaming." He rubbed his face, trying to snap out of the confusion. But no matter how many times he blinked or shook his head, the woman remained there, as real as ever. Finally, he gathered the courage to approach her. Gently, he reached out and shook her shoulder. "Hey, wake up." It took a few seconds, but then her eyes fluttered open. Daniel stumbled back in surprise as the woman's gaze locked onto him. Her eyes weren't just a shade of blue or green. They were an almost glowing pale silver, as though the stars themselves lived within them. They looked right through him, as if she could see every part of him, even the parts he didn't want to be seen. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice soft, but with an edge of urgency. "You're in my apartment," Daniel said, still in shock. "Who are you? How did you get here?" She sat up slowly, her movements graceful but cautious. The way she looked around the room, scanning everything, made Daniel feel like she wasn't just a stranger to Earth. She was a stranger to this entire world. There was something about her that felt alien, and not in a literal sense, but in a way that made his skin crawl. "I'm sorry," she said after a pause. "I didn't mean to intrude. My name is Vyra." "Vyra," Daniel echoed, still unsure of what was going on. "How did you get here?" Vyra stood up, still unsteady on her feet, as if the effort of moving was too much for her. She pressed a hand to her forehead, and Daniel could see the faint shimmer of something, some sort of technology or device, underneath the skin of her wrist. It looked like a bracelet, but it was unlike anything he'd ever seen before. The light around it pulsed softly. I don't remember how I got here," Vyra said, her voice trembling slightly. "I was running from something, and then I ended up here. I don't know why." Daniel frowned. "Running from what? Who are you running from?" Vyra hesitated, her eyes darting around as though she was expecting someone or something to appear at any moment. "It's not safe for me to stay here," she whispered, almost to herself. "I've been on the run for so long, and now they found me. They'll come looking." "Who's they?" Daniel asked, his heart pounding faster now. This whole situation felt wrong. He had no idea what was going on, but the urgency in her voice told him that he had to act. Vera stepped back, her eyes wide with fear. I don't have time to explain everything, but I need your help. If you don't mind, I just need a place to hide for a while. I swear I'm not a threat. Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, a strange noise came from outside his window. A low, humming sound that made the entire apartment seem to vibrate. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, closer. The hairs on Daniel's neck stood up again, and he instinctively took a step back. "What is that?" he asked, his voice shaky. Vira's face went pale, and she rushed to the window, peering out into the dark night. "They're here." Before Daniel could react, the hum grew into a roar, and everything around him began to feel different. It was as if the world was shifting, and there was no turning back. Daniel could hardly breathe. The woman, Vera, was pacing back and forth, her eyes flicking to the window every few seconds, as if expecting something, or someone, to break through. The humming sound from outside had grown louder, now joined by a strange metallic clicking noise. It felt like the whole world was on edge. "What's going on?" Daniel asked, trying to keep his voice steady. He couldn't help but feel that something terrible was about to happen. His apartment, once a quiet haven, now felt like a trap. Vira didn't answer immediately. She kept looking out the window, her hand pressed against the wall, as if trying to keep herself steady. The fear in her eyes was palpable. Finally, she turned to him, her face drawn with concern. "Listen, you need to hide," she said, her voice urgent. "If they find me here, they won't stop until they have me." Daniel opened his mouth to protest, but before he could speak, a flash of light illuminated the room, followed by a loud bang. It sounded like something had crashed into the side of the building. His heart raced as he looked around, trying to figure out where it had come from. "Stay down," Vera hissed, diving to the floor beside him. She pulled him down with her, and they both crouched behind the couch, trying to stay out of sight. "What is happening?" Daniel whispered, his mind spinning. This was too much. Just a few hours ago, he had been preparing to relax and unwind. Now he was hiding from whatever was outside, with a strange woman who seemed to be the center of all the chaos. Vira glanced over at him, her face pale. "They are after me," she said quietly. "They won't stop until they catch me." Daniel frowned, still not fully understanding. "Who are they? And why are they after you?" For a moment, Vera didn't answer. Instead, she stared out the window again, her eyes narrowed. The noise from outside was getting closer. Daniel could feel his pulse quicken as the air in the apartment grew thicker with tension. Finally, Vera spoke, her voice low and serious. "I am not from here," she said. "I'm not even from your planet." Daniel blinked in confusion. "What do you mean, not from here?" Vira took a deep breath, then sat up slightly, her eyes meeting his. "I'm not human. I come from a distant world, one far beyond your stars. The people after me are from my home. They want something I have." "What is it?" Daniel asked, his curiosity growing despite the fear gnawing at him. The idea of someone from another world, another planet, was almost too much to believe. But the situation in his apartment didn't seem like something from a movie. It was real. "I'm carrying something they want," Vera said softly, her eyes clouded with regret. "Something that could change everything for them. For me. For everyone." Daniel could tell she was holding back. There was more to this story, but she wasn't ready to share it all. He could see the pain in her eyes, the weight of the burden she was carrying. Whatever this thing was, it meant more than just her life. It was tied to something much bigger. "And you're running from them?" Daniel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Vira nodded. "Yes. I had to leave. My people, they betrayed me. They tried to use me. I barely escaped with my life." Daniel's mind raced as he tried to process what she was saying. He had always thought of himself as an average guy. No big adventures, no dangerous secrets, just a job, a quiet life. And now, here he was, sitting on the floor of his apartment with a woman who claimed she wasn't from Earth, hiding from mysterious enemies. It all felt like a dream, or a nightmare. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Daniel asked, his voice full of disbelief. He wasn't angry, not really, just confused. Vera shook her head, her eyes downcast. I couldn't risk you getting involved. You're not ready to understand." Before Daniel could respond, the sound of boots pounding on the pavement outside echoed through the window. It was a rhythmic, mechanical sound, heavy, deliberate. Vera tensed, her face hardening with determination. "They're here," she whispered, almost to herself. Then, more firmly, she turned to Daniel. "Listen to me. You need to go. Get out of here. Now." Daniel shook his head. "I'm not leaving you." "You don't understand," Vera said, grabbing his arm. "These people, these beings, they won't hesitate to destroy everything in their path to get to me. If you stay, you'll be in danger too. I won't let them hurt you." "I'm not going anywhere," Daniel said firmly. His voice was steady now, and he found himself standing taller, driven by a sense of responsibility. There was something about Vera that made him want to protect her, something that went beyond logic. Vera stared at him for a moment, as if weighing her options. Finally, she sighed. "Fine, but stay close to me. And when I say run, you run." Before Daniel could reply, the door to his apartment burst open with a crash. The light from outside filled the room as a group of figures stormed in. Their features were hidden by helmets, and their dark suits glowed faintly in the dim apartment light. They moved with purpose, scanning the room with mechanical precision. Daniel's heart raced, and he took a step back, instinctively pulling Vera behind him. "Where is she?" one of the figures demanded, his voice distorted by a strange robotic filter. Vera took a deep breath, her hand slipping into her jacket. For a split second, Daniel thought she might be unarmed. But then, she pulled out a small glowing device. It seemed like a piece of technology, but unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. With a quick movement, she pressed a button, and the room's temperature seemed to drop, sending a chill through the air. "Leave now," Vera said, her voice calm but full of authority. The figures didn't move. Instead, they raised their weapons. "Wrong move," one of them sneered. Daniel could feel the tension in the air, and he knew this was only the beginning. The figures in the doorway didn't move, their cold, robotic voices echoing in the small apartment. Daniel could hear the tension crackling in the air. Vera stood beside him, her body tense, her hand still holding the strange glowing device. She looked at him briefly, her expression hard and focused. "Do not try to resist," one of the figures said, stepping forward. "You can't hide her from us." Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know who these people were, but the cold certainty in their voices made him nervous. The way they spoke, like they had all the power in the world. It made him feel small, weak. But Vera wasn't backing down. Her eyes glinted with defiance, and she slowly raised the device in her hand, pointing it toward the group. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He didn't know what it could do, but he had seen how it had affected the temperature in the room earlier. He could only imagine what else it might be capable of. "Leave now," Vera commanded, her voice steady and unwavering, "or you'll regret it." The figures didn't flinch. Instead, they seemed to laugh, a distorted mechanical sound that made Daniel's skin crawl. "You're in no position to make demands," one of them said. "You're coming with us, whether you like it or not." The tension in the room snapped like a stretched rubber band, and before Daniel could even react, Vera moved. She threw her hand forward, and the device in her grip pulsed with a bright flash of light. Daniel barely had time to shield his eyes before a powerful wave of energy exploded from the device, sending the figures stumbling backward. The force of the blast was enough to send one of the figures crashing into the wall with a loud thud, their armor crumpling under the impact. The other figures recovered quickly, but it was clear that they hadn't expected such a violent response. Their weapons, which had looked like sleek, advanced technology, now seemed less intimidating in the face of Vera's power. Daniel's jaw dropped. He had seen enough action movies to know what a fight looked like, but this was something different. Vera wasn't just defending herself. She was fighting for her life, and she was doing it with terrifying skill. "Get out of here," Vera shouted at Daniel, her voice sharp. "Go." For a moment, Daniel stood frozen, unable to comprehend what was happening. The figures outside were regrouping, but he couldn't tear his eyes away from Vera. She was a force of nature, moving with a confidence and grace that seemed to defy the danger around her. "Now," Vera snapped, and this time, Daniel moved. Without thinking, he turned and bolted for the back door, heart hammering in his chest. He could hear the sound of the figures moving behind him, but he didn't dare look back. All he knew was that he had to run, had to get away from whatever these people were. He didn't know who they were or what they wanted, but he couldn't risk staying any longer. Daniel burst out into the alley behind his apartment, gasping for breath. The cool night air felt like a shock to his system, and for a moment he stood there, trying to gather his bearings. He had never been in a situation like this before, and he had no idea what to do next. He turned back toward the apartment, but before he could go any further, he heard a voice behind him. "Daniel." It was Vera's voice, sharp and commanding. Daniel spun around, his heart leaping in his chest. She was standing in the alley behind him, her face pale but determined. She had followed him, despite the danger, and now she was standing between him and the group of armed figures that were closing in. "Stay close," Vera said, grabbing his arm and pulling him further into the alley. "They won't stop coming. We need to get out of here." The figures were moving fast, their steps heavy and measured. Daniel could hear them getting closer with every passing second. He had to think fast. They couldn't outrun them. But what could they do? Vera had her device, but she was clearly exhausted from using it. "What are we going to do?" Daniel asked, his voice frantic. "They'll catch us." Vera's eyes flickered with worry, but she didn't show any fear. "We need to find shelter," she said. "Somewhere they won't expect us. I know a place." Without waiting for a response, she pulled him deeper into the shadows, moving with surprising speed. Daniel kept up as best as he could, his mind racing. He couldn't believe this was happening. 1 minute, he had been sitting in his apartment, and now he was running for his life with a woman who claimed to be from another planet. He didn't know who these figures were or why they were after her, but one thing was clear. If he didn't stay close to her, he might not make it out alive. They ran for what felt like hours, ducking into alleys, weaving through back streets, until Daniel's legs burned with exhaustion. Vera seemed unaffected by the strain, her pace never slowing, her focus never wavering. Finally, they reached an old building on the outskirts of the city, a place Daniel had never seen before. It was run down, the windows boarded up, and the door was barely hanging on its hinges. But Vera didn't hesitate. She pushed open the door with a force that sent it swinging wide, revealing a dimly lit interior. "We're safe for now," she said, pulling Daniel inside. The door slammed shut behind them, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Daniel allowed himself to breathe. But as he stood in the dark, abandoned building, his mind kept racing. Who were these people chasing Vera? And why had they stopped at nothing to find her? Vera stood by the door, her hand on the handle, her eyes scanning the room as if expecting the figures to follow them inside. She looked tired, her body tense, but there was a fire in her eyes that refused to die. "We have a long way to go," she said quietly. "But this isn't over yet." Daniel didn't reply. He didn't know what was coming next, but he knew one thing for sure. His life had changed forever. The inside of the building was dimly lit, and the air smelled of dust and old wood. Daniel could barely make out the outline of broken furniture, scattered papers, and what seemed like an old storage room. It was a place no one would visit, and that was exactly why Vira had brought him here. For now, they were safe. She stood near the door, her hand still resting on the handle as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone, even though he couldn't hear any movement. The weight of the silence in the room felt almost suffocating. Vira turned to him, her eyes tired but focused. "We can't stay here long," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The people who are chasing me, they won't stop looking. They have ways of tracking me." Daniel nodded, still processing everything she had told him. He had always thought of his life as normal, quiet, uneventful. But now, it felt like he was in the middle of a story much bigger than he could understand. "Who are they?" Daniel asked, his voice low. "And why are they after you?" Vira hesitated for a moment, her gaze turning distant. For the first time, she seemed uncertain, her confidence slipping away. She took a deep breath before answering. "They're not just people," Vera said, her voice steadying as she continued. "They're something else. They're not from Earth. They came to my world years ago, claiming they wanted peace. But they lied. They came to take control. They took everything. My home, my family, and my people. They have advanced technology, and they've been hunting me ever since." Daniel blinked in disbelief. "Wait, you're saying they're aliens?" Vira nodded slowly. "Yes, they're from another galaxy, and they've been coming to different worlds, conquering them, using them for their own purposes. I got away when they tried to use me for something I didn't want to be a part of." Daniel's mind spun with the information. He had always been fascinated by science fiction and stories of alien worlds, but this was no movie. This was real, and it was happening to him. The woman he was standing next to wasn't just any stranger. She was running from beings with technology far beyond anything Earth had. "So, what do they want with you?" Daniel asked, his voice soft. Vera closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering the strength to say what she had been avoiding. When she opened them again, her expression was hard, her jaw clenched. "They want something I have. A device, a weapon that can change everything. It was meant to protect my people, but they figured out how to use it to control entire worlds." Daniel took a step forward, his mind racing. "You have this weapon?" Vera nodded. "Yes, and if they get their hands on it, they'll have the power to do whatever they want. They could destroy entire civilizations without lifting a finger." Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. He was in the middle of something far bigger than he had ever imagined, a weapon that could change entire worlds. If these beings got their hands on it, who knew what they would do next? "We can't let them find it," Daniel said, his voice firm. "We can't let them use it." Vira's eyes softened for a moment, and for the first time, she seemed to relax a little. "I knew you wouldn't run, but I need your help. This device is the only thing standing between them and total control. Without it, there's nothing stopping them from destroying everything." Daniel's mind was still reeling from everything he had just learned. He had gone from a normal, quiet life to being part of a struggle for survival against beings from another galaxy. His heart was heavy with the weight of the responsibility he had been thrust into. "How do we stop them?" Daniel asked, his voice full of resolve. Vira looked at him, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. "We don't have much time. They'll be here soon. We need to get to the device before they do." Daniel nodded, but his mind was still racing. He didn't know how he could help her, but he knew one thing. He couldn't just walk away. Vera wasn't just a stranger anymore. She had become someone he needed to protect, even if he didn't fully understand why. The thought of her being hunted down by these aliens filled him with dread, and he wasn't about to let that happen. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the front of the building, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. The figures had found them. "They're here," Vera said, her voice sharp and urgent. "We have to move. Now." Without waiting for a response, Vera grabbed Daniel's arm and pulled him toward a narrow staircase leading up to the second floor. Daniel barely had time to react before they were rushing up the stairs, their footsteps echoing in the empty building. The sound of the intruders grew louder, and Daniel could hear them calling out to each other, their voices distorted by the same robotic filter. They were getting closer. Vera pushed open a door at the top of the stairs, revealing a small room with a single window. "We have to get to the roof," she said, her voice breathless. "It's the only way out." They moved quickly, Daniel's heart pounding in his chest as they climbed through the window onto the rooftop. The cold night air hit him like a slap, but there was no time to worry about that. The sound of their pursuers was closer now, the mechanical clicks and whirs of their weapons filling the air. Vera scanned the rooftop, her eyes darting from one side to the other. "There's a transport waiting for us," she said, "but we have to get there before they do." Daniel barely registered her words as he turned to look down at the alley below. He could see the figures moving toward the building, their shadows stretching across the street. There was no way they would be able to outrun them, not with their advanced technology. "We have to move faster," Daniel said, his voice urgent. "They're closing in." Vera nodded, her expression set. "We will. Just stick with me." Together, they ran across the roof, leaping over gaps and ducking under low-hanging pipes. Every second felt like an eternity, and Daniel could hear the pounding of their pursuers' footsteps behind them. The chase wasn't over, and the stakes had never been higher. The rooftop felt like it was closing in on Daniel as he and Vera ran, each step faster than the last. The wind whipped around them, and the cold air seemed to freeze every breath he took. Below, the figures were closing in, their footsteps echoing in the alley below, growing louder with each passing second. The sound of their advanced weapons clicking and whirring was enough to send chills down Daniel's spine. "We have to get to the transport," Vera shouted, her voice cutting through the wind. She was moving quickly, her eyes scanning every corner of the roof, looking for the quickest way down. Her face was hard with determination, but Daniel could see the weariness in her movements. The chase had drained her, but she wasn't about to stop now. Daniel pushed himself harder, his legs burning with each step, trying to keep up. He had never run like this before, never felt the adrenaline pumping through his veins like this. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. There was no going back. He was in this now, whether he wanted to be or not. There. Vera pointed ahead, and Daniel followed her gaze. At the far end of the roof, hidden behind a small stack of metal crates, was a sleek, dark ship. It was small but advanced, with strange markings on its side that Daniel couldn't recognize. The ship looked like something out of a science fiction movie, but there was no time to marvel at it. Vera didn't waste any time. She grabbed Daniel's arm, pulling him toward the ship. They were almost there, just a few more steps. But as they neared the edge of the roof, a loud crack sounded from behind them. Daniel spun around just in time to see one of the figures leap onto the roof, his metallic boots making a loud, unnerving sound as they hit the surface. The figure was fast, too fast. He was already charging toward them, his weapon aimed straight at Vera. "No," Daniel shouted, his body reacting before his mind could catch up. Without thinking, he lunged forward, throwing himself into the path of the weapon. Vera's eyes widened in shock, and in that moment everything seemed to slow down. The figure's weapon fired, and Daniel felt a sharp pain in his side as a bolt of energy hit him. He stumbled, falling to the ground, his breath leaving his chest in a sharp gasp. He could hear Vera's voice, but it felt distant, like she was calling to him from far away. "Daniel," Vera cried, her voice filled with panic. She was by his side in an instant, her hand on his shoulder, trying to help him sit up. "Stay with me. We have to go now." Daniel's vision blurred, and he could feel his strength slipping away. The pain in his side was intense, But it wasn't the worst of it. The worst part was knowing he had failed. To protect her, to stay strong. He had let his guard down for just a second, and now they were even more vulnerable. But Vyra wasn't giving up. She gritted her teeth and pulled him to his feet with surprising strength, her eyes fierce with determination. "We're not leaving without you," she said, her voice sharp. "Stay with me." With a strength he didn't know he had left, Daniel pushed through the pain and followed her as she half-dragged him toward the ship. The figure that had shot him was getting closer, but Daniel could barely focus on anything but the sound of Vera's voice and the constant, rhythmic pounding of his own heartbeat. They reached the ship's entrance just as the figure lunged at them, his weapon raised. Vera didn't hesitate. With a swift movement, she pulled open the door to the ship and pushed Daniel inside. "Get in," she shouted. Daniel stumbled inside the ship, his body slumping against the cool metal floor. He tried to sit up, but his vision was swimming and his head felt heavy. Vera was already at the control panel, her hands moving quickly over the buttons and switches. Outside, the sound of the figure pounding on the ship's door echoed through the night. Daniel could hear the hum of the ship's engines as they powered up, and within moments, the whole ship seemed to lift off the ground. Vyra's face was a mask of concentration, her eyes focused on the controls. But Daniel could see the worry in her movements. She was afraid, not for herself, but for him. She was scared he wouldn't make it, and that thought made his chest tighten. The ship jolted, and they shot into the sky, leaving the city behind. The lights below grew smaller and smaller, fading into the distance. But even as they flew higher, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't safe yet. "They're still coming," Vera said quietly, her voice filled with frustration. She glanced over at Daniel, her face softening for a brief moment. "You're hurt." I'll be fine," Daniel interrupted, his voice weak but determined. "Just get us out of here." Vyra didn't argue. She focused back on the controls, and the ship sped faster, cutting through the night sky. Daniel closed his eyes, trying to steady his breathing. His side throbbed with pain, but he was alive, and that meant something. After a few minutes, the ship leveled out, and the shaking stopped. Daniel opened his eyes, finding himself staring out the small window at the stars stretching out before them. The endless black of space seemed to go on forever, and for the first time, he felt how small he really was. But at the same time, he felt a strange sense of awe. "We're safe for now," Vera said, her voice softer than before. She turned to him, her eyes full of concern. "You're hurt. We need to take care of that." Daniel nodded slowly, his mind still foggy. He could feel the sting of the wound on his side, but the pain wasn't the worst of it. The worst part was knowing that their fight was far from over. The alien pursuers would keep coming, and Vera had no choice but to keep running. But in that moment, something shifted inside Daniel. He couldn't go back to his old life. Not now. He was in this fight for the long haul, and he wasn't going to let her down. "We need to find out more about them," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the pain. "We need to stop them before they destroy everything." Vyra looked at him for a long moment, and then she nodded. "We will. Together." And as the ship sped off into the vastness of space, Daniel knew that this was just the beginning of a battle far bigger than anything he had ever imagined. The ship soared through the vastness of space, its engines humming smoothly as the stars outside streaked past like tiny pinpricks of light. Daniel sat back against the cool metal walls, his side still throbbing with pain. The bandage that Vera had hastily wrapped around his wound felt tight, but it was the least of his worries. His mind raced, thoughts colliding with one another. Vyra was quiet beside him, her eyes focused on the control panel, but Daniel could tell she was thinking just as hard as he was. The silence between them felt heavy, filled with unspoken questions and fears. "We're safe for now," Vyra finally said, her voice soft but firm. "But we can't let our guard down." "Not yet." Daniel nodded, his body still recovering from the shock of everything that had happened. He had never been this close to death, never experienced the kind of danger that came from being hunted by alien forces. It was hard to believe that just days ago, he had been living a quiet, ordinary life. And now, here he was, in a strange ship, fleeing from beings who wanted to destroy everything. Vera glanced over at him, her eyes searching his face. "How are you feeling?" "I'll survive," Daniel said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "But there's something I don't understand." Vera raised an eyebrow, a silent question. "Why are they after you? What's so important about you and that device you have?" Vera hesitated. She had told him some of the story, but not everything. He could see the reluctance in her eyes, the way she seemed to avoid the full truth. "I told you," she said slowly. "They want the device. It's a weapon, one that can change the balance of power in the galaxy." "Yeah, but that doesn't explain why they're willing to hunt you down. They've already destroyed your world, right? So why are they so determined to get you?" Vera's face darkened, and for the first time, Daniel saw the weight of the burden she carried. She looked away, her eyes staring into the distance. "It's not just the device. It's me. I'm the key." "The key?" Daniel repeated, confused. "The key to what?" Vera turned to face him, her expression serious. "To unlocking the full power of the device. The people who are chasing me, they don't just want it for the weapon it is. They want it for the power it can give them. And I'm the only one who can make it work." Daniel sat up straighter, his mind working to catch up. "But why you? What makes you so special?" Vera's eyes seemed to pierce through him, and for a moment, Daniel felt like she was seeing into the deepest parts of his soul. "I wasn't just born into this," she said quietly. "I was chosen. My family, my people, they've always been guardians of this device. But I'm different. I have the ability to activate its true power." Daniel felt a shiver run down his spine. A weapon that could change the galaxy, and she was the one who could control it. No wonder the aliens were so desperate to find her. The power they could wield with that device was unimaginable. "But if you can control it," Daniel said slowly, "why not just use it against them? Destroy them before they can hurt anyone else." Vera's face hardened, and her voice dropped to a whisper. "I've tried. I've tried to use it. But it's too dangerous. If I activate it fully, I'm not sure what will happen. I might lose control. It's something I can't just turn on without knowing the consequences." Daniel didn't know what to say. The weight of her words settled over him, heavy and real. He had seen Vera fight, seen her strong and confident. But now he saw the fear in her eyes. Fear of the power she carried. Fear of what might happen if she used it. They sat in silence for a long time, the ship moving through the quiet void of space. Daniel's mind raced, trying to make sense of everything. It seemed like they were up against something much bigger than he had ever imagined. A weapon that could change the course of history. An alien force bent on controlling everything. And Vera, the key to it all, was stuck in the middle, struggling to control something that could destroy them all. "Vera," Daniel said, breaking the silence, "we need to find a way to stop them. We can't just run forever." She looked at him, her eyes softening. "I know, but we can't do it alone. We'll need allies. We'll need a plan." Daniel nodded, feeling the weight of the situation settle on his shoulders. "Then we find allies. We find a way to stop them before they destroy everything." Vera gave him a small, tired smile. "You're more determined than I thought." "I don't know what I'm doing," Daniel admitted, "but I know one thing for sure. I'm not going to let them win." Vera's expression shifted, a hint of something like respect in her gaze. "You're right. We can't let them win. Not now. Not ever." The ship continued to hum as it traveled deeper into space, away from the city and the life Daniel had known. Ahead of them lay the unknown. An enemy they didn't fully understand, a device they couldn't control, and a fight that was just beginning. Daniel looked out the window at the endless stars. the vastness of space stretching out before them. For the first time since all of this had begun, he felt a flicker of hope. He wasn't alone anymore. He had Vera by his side, and together they had a chance. "Where are we going?" Daniel asked, glancing at her. "We need to find a place where we can regroup," Vera replied. "A hidden base where I can get help. There are others who might understand this better than I do. They can help us figure out how to stop them." "Then let's get there as fast as we can." Vera nodded, her expression hardening with determination. "We'll get there, and when we do, we'll make our stand." Daniel couldn't help but feel a sense of resolve building inside him. He didn't know what was coming next, but he knew one thing. They weren't going down without a fight. The ship cut through the darkness of space, its sleek frame reflecting the starlight as it moved with quiet precision. Daniel sat at the controls, his hands gripping the edge of his seat as he stared out into the vast expanse of stars. The silence of space surrounded them, but the weight of their mission hung heavily in the air. Vira was seated beside him, her eyes scanning the control panel with intense focus. It had been days since they left the safety of the last hiding place. The journey had been long, and every moment had brought them closer to the enemy, but neither of them had been willing to stop. Not now. "You're sure about this?" Daniel asked, his voice quiet. His question wasn't about their destination. It was about everything. The fight, the risks, the uncertainty. Vira looked over at him, her face hard but resolute. "There's no other choice. We can't keep running. If we do, they'll catch up with us eventually. And when they do, there won't be anything left to save." Daniel exhaled slowly, trying to push away the fear building in his chest. He had always lived a simple life, never worrying about big, dangerous things. But now, he was in the middle of a war, one that involved a galaxy-changing weapon and an alien force determined to destroy everything. It was far from simple. "I know," Daniel replied, his voice steady despite the uncertainty. "But I still don't fully understand what we're walking into. Who are these people who want to destroy everything? And why do they want that device so badly?" Vira's expression darkened, the weight of her past showing in her eyes. "They're not just conquerors. They're more like parasites, feeding off the energy of the worlds they conquer. They destroy entire civilizations, strip them of everything, resources, people, even memories, and leave nothing behind. They're called the Tyrants, and they've been doing this for centuries." "Tyrants," Daniel repeated, the name sounding cold and menacing. He couldn't imagine what kind of beings could be so cruel, so driven by power. "And they want this device to control more worlds." Vera nodded. "Yes. The device isn't just a weapon. It's a key to unlocking the true power of the Tyrants' technology. If they get their hands on it, they'll be unstoppable. They'll be able to wipe out entire populations, destroy whole planets with a single command." Daniel swallowed hard. It was more terrifying than anything he had ever imagined. A weapon that could end entire worlds. He couldn't let that happen. Not on his watch. "So what now?" Daniel asked, his voice grim. "How do we stop them?" "We find the others," Vira replied. "There's a group of rebels, people who have been fighting the Tyrants for years. They're scattered across the galaxy, but they have the resources and knowledge we need. Together, we can stop them." Daniel nodded, understanding the weight of her words. The mission had shifted. It wasn't just about running or hiding anymore. It was about fighting back. And it was a fight they couldn't afford to lose. A low beep sounded from the control panel, and Vera's eyes snapped to it. She tapped a few buttons quickly, then glanced back at Daniel. "We're here." Daniel's heart skipped a beat as he looked ahead. There in the distance was a small planet surrounded by a cluster of ships, some of them hidden within the debris of an old space station. The planet was dark, almost lifeless, but the faint glow of energy sources hinted at activity below. "This is it," Vera said, her voice steady. "The hidden base. The rebels should be here. They approached the planet cautiously, and Daniel's pulse quickened. He had no idea what they would find there. Would the rebels help them? Would they be prepared to face the tyrants? Everything depended on it. As the ship landed on a small platform near the planet's surface, Vera turned to Daniel, her face serious. "Once we go in, there's no turning back. We're putting everything on the line." Daniel met her gaze. "I'm ready." They both stepped out of the ship, their feet crunching on the rocky surface. The air was thin and cold, and Daniel wrapped his jacket tighter around himself. The base was quiet, almost too quiet, and for a moment, Daniel felt uneasy. "I don't like this," Daniel muttered. "Where are they?" Vira's hand went to her sidearm, her eyes scanning the horizon. "They're here. They're just waiting for the right moment to make contact." Suddenly, a group of figures emerged from behind a row of rocks, their faces hidden by hoods and helmets. They moved quickly, silently, and in perfect formation. One of them stepped forward, lowering his hood to reveal a weathered face and sharp, calculating eyes. "You made it," the man said, his voice rough but with a hint of respect. "I wasn't sure you would." Vira nodded. "We had no choice. The tyrants are coming. We need your help." The man studied her for a long moment, then turned his gaze to Daniel. "And you? You're with her?" Daniel nodded. "I'm with her. We need to stop the tyrants before they destroy everything." The man's eyes flickered with interest. "You're brave, but bravery won't be enough. We need a plan. We need to strike them hard, before they can strike us." Vera stepped forward, her voice calm but determined. "We have a weapon, and we have you. Together, we can end this." The man looked at the others, nodding. "All right, we'll work together. But be warned, this won't be easy. The tyrants won't go down without a fight." Vira turned to Daniel, her eyes filled with resolve. "We knew that going in." Daniel nodded, a fire igniting inside him. This was the moment. They had made it this far, and there was no turning back. They would fight. They would win, or they would die trying.